So how long have GMOs been around for? Really not that long. This is a pretty new technology. So in 1973 was the very first GMO. Now again, a GMO is just a genetically modified organism. And in the 1970s, we figured out a way to take the DNA from a bacterium and insert it into another organism. That's it. That's all we did. But that was our very first GMO. So this was only, 45 years ago. In 1978, we actually started using bacteria to help us as humans. We actually put the human insulin gene into bacteria, and so the bacteria were making insulin. That's the same exact insulin that people with diabetes are using. But it wasn't until 1994 that the first GMO food, something we actually consume, was released. And they were called Flavor Saver tomatoes. They were designed to have a longer shelf life. That didn't actually happen being the case, which is why they're not around anymore, but showing you that these are actually relatively young. They haven't been around that long. For some of you, this may have been during your lifetime, was the first GMO food released onto the market. So what are the downsides? One, we're still not really sure. This is a new technology. We have only been eating them for the past 20, 30 years. So we don't really know yet, at least long term. Short term, there's really no downsides, at least to human health. You know, like I said, you and I were eating GMOs more than likely every single meal of the day. But you're still here. You are healthy, so we don't know. There could be long-term effects, but we haven't been around long enough yet to know. Similar to pesticides, you do have issues with super pests as well. So for example, if you have a GMO that has a pesticide coded into this DNA, like that corn example, yes, it's going to kill a lot of those pests, but there'll be a couple that survive. And the couple that survive, they're going to reproduce and make more pests that are resistant. And we're starting to see this as well. So we're starting to see these super pests, so that the GMOs we have won't really matter. And another problem too is that these GMOs, when they pollinate, those genes are pollinating to other crops. So the superpest problem becomes a problem for a lot of species, because the DNA from one is landing on another plant, and they might make a new plant, a new hybrid that's resistant to these pests. But superpests, that'll take a couple decades, but you're going to start creating pests that are resistant to these. Also, this becomes a problem with suing. So people who are growing GMO crops have sued local farmers for also growing GMO crops without buying the seeds. So for example, I have a field, my plants are pollinating, well, some of that pollen is going to go into surrounding fields. The company that creates these GMO crops has actually sued farmers, like, hey, you have a GMO crop, but you didn't buy them from us. And the farmer's like, you're right, I didn't, because I'm not. But it was actually a nearby field that pollinated those crops. This is kind of not very common, but it has happened to a couple farmers, which kind of sucks. Like, they get sued, they lose money, and potentially lose their farm for something that wasn't their fault. It was their neighbor's plants that were being pollinated. So with that said, there haven't really been any studies that have shown that GMOs are bad for human health. We have seen that GMOs can be harmful to the environment. But when it comes to humans, they're really not that bad. And I emphasize this because a lot of people are like, oh no, GMOs, I won't eat them, I need to not eat them at all. But that's not the case. They are safe for human health. There's been tons of studies in the European Union. Remember, the European Union, a lot more strict on their policies for what gets released to the market. In the European Union, they let people eat them. They've done studies. They said, yes, they are safe. So if the European Union says it's okay, I would say it's okay as well. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean that they're labeled or not. So here in the United States, we do not require foods to be labeled as GMO-free. In a lot of other countries around the world, which is in this map in green, they do require labeling. In red are countries where they are completely banned. But in green, you can have them, you just need a label that they do have GMOs in them. This graph is showing the difference between the amount of GMOs released in the United States versus the European Union. So as you can see, in the EU, they are releasing GMOs. They have recognized that they are okay. However, you can see it takes a lot longer for them. So these 3 different shapes are representing 4 different GMO crops. In the United States, every single time in the United States, it is released before they are in the European Union. And again, that's because in the European Union, they do a lot more review of these different crops. In general, not only are we releasing them faster, but also releasing a lot more of them, whereas the EU is a lot lower growth. So again, just showing it is safer, but this also shows you the difference between the precautionary principle and the American approach when it comes to new things on the market. Things are changing in the United States, though. Congress has actually passed a labeling law requiring that GMOs will be labeled, and this was signed in the Obama administration. This was signed last year in 2016. Now, it's not in effect yet. The USDA, so the United States Drug Administration, they are the ones who have to create the rules. So essentially saying, what gets labeled, how does it get labeled, how big does the font have to be, etc. And those rules have to be created by July 2018. Starting July 2018, then companies are typically given 1 to 3 years to comply with the rules. So we're not going to see anything change for the next 5 to 6 years, but it is slowly underway. So as an overview, a genetically modified organism is just taking the DNA from one organism and putting it into another organism. There's a lot of debate as to whether GMOs are safe, and I would say yes, they are. The European Union has passed them, and there haven't been any studies saying that they are not safe, at least for human consumption. But you might be a concerned environmentalist. They are having negative repercussions on our environment, and so that enough might be a reason to stop consuming GMOs. But for the most part, they are safe. Although they are not banned in a lot of countries, there are a lot of labeling laws, and the United States has its own labeling law, which will go in effect in the next few years.